Isaac Asimov's The Caves of Steel. More sci-fi, obviously, because Asimov. Although, actually, did you know he wrote like 500 books, and apparently his books appear in every numbering or category of the Dewey Decimal System save like 2 or something. Anyway, I've only ever read science fiction by Asimov, so I can't really talk about the rest of it. But I had never before now read any of his robot series, and I've also still never read any of his Foundation series. But this summer I went to a talk at the library about Asimov and those 2 specific series, and learned that the robot series is pretty simply a trilogy of books about a police detective and a robot. And I was like, fuck yeah, I want to read a book about a robot solving mysteries with a human. Fuck yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that is what this is about. So that's what all 3 of them are about, I guess. But this is the first one, The Caves of Steel. And basic premise is that Elijah Bailey is a cop in future New York, which has grown to this mega city, and it's under a dome and whatever, and that's how everybody lives, except for the spacers who live on other planets and are kind of weird according to the people on Earth, and the people on Earth are pretty weird according to the spacers, so I think they're both weird, so you know, it's fair. But some guy, like there are some spacers who have come to Earth and made a little city just outside New York that they call Spacetown, and that's kind of their embassy, if you will. And somebody gets murdered, and Bailey is asked to investigate the murder alongside the first of his kind humanoid robot, R. Daniel Olivow. And, what's his name, right? They, like, never say his surname. Okay. I don't even know why he has one. The R stands for robot. Okay, so he looks exactly like a person. Even naked, which is something that they felt the need to point out at one point. Like, thanks. It was funny because Lige is like, okay. My favorite thing about Bailey is that he goes by Lige, which is a nickname which had not occurred to me for Elijah, but I like it. And his wife's name is Jezebel. Anyway, I liked it. It was a pretty classic murder mystery. Like, it took kind of a while to really get into actually solving the murder, because most of it was just like, here's a bunch of stuff about how their society works, and here's how they feel about robots, and here's how Bailey feels about robots, and, you know, and him trying to work with Daniel, which is difficult because he is kind of like, what? Like, Daniel is... Robots and Asimov are interesting because in a lot of fiction that I'm more familiar with it as robot, outside of Asimov, there's a tendency more for the robots to be people in a way that they aren't necessarily in Asimov stuff. Like, whatever that difference is between an extremely sophisticated machine and a person, I don't know that Daniel quite crosses it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it becomes a little bit muddier as the other books continue on. But what's interesting is, like, he is the only robot that looks this much like a human and can imitate the way humans, you know, act and talk as much as he can, to the point where if someone doesn't know he's a robot, they will not clock him as a robot. And so, like, he was designed for, like, data gathering or something, but then in order for him to help in this murder investigation, they basically just, like, gave him a justice subroutine or whatever. And Bailey's like, what? That doesn't make you a cop, you know? But Daniel is so, like, inoffensive. He's just like, okay. I also, like, really love this cover. I think they're probably in New York in this picture. The Caves of Steel refers, by the way, to the Dome Cities. Yeah. I don't know what else to say. I do definitely want to read more of this series, like, and I would say, like, if you haven't read Asimov, you totally should, but I would recommend his short stories, and specifically I would recommend Nightfall. Fucking read Nightfall. It is so good. He expanded it into an actual book, which I own, actually. It's about the size of this one, maybe a little bit longer. But if you read the short story, you should do it, because it fucking blew my mind. Like, that's what I love about science fiction is the creativity. So with Asimov, like, he didn't write beautifully, I don't think, but he wrote a lot, and he had a lot of ideas. He was very creative, so it's always just fun to read something by him and see the way that he's built up whatever world he's talking about, and yeah, yeah, so I liked it. It was alright. It wasn't amazing, but whatever. I didn't expect it to be amazing. I definitely got what I wanted out of it, and I will read the sequel, which I don't remember the title of off the top of my head, at some point. Yes. So, yes. More nonfiction. A False Report, A True Story of Rape in America by T. Christian Miller and Ken Armstrong. They won the Pulitzer Prize. I don't know if it was for this. Anyway, God. Well, after reading Bunk, I was like, okay, enough about depressing racism. Let's get a nonfiction book about some other depressing subject, I guess, apparently. So, this is about a specific, serial rapist in Colorado who was, I don't know, he was caught a few years ago. I'm shit at noting years. Okay, let's see, it says this one thing happened in 2008. But yeah, I mean, this stuff was like, I don't know, he was probably caught like 6 or 7 years ago. Anyway, anyway, yeah, so it's a story of the police investigation that led to catching the guy, but kind of what makes it interesting is that there was this young woman in Colorado who had reported a rape, and it, like, turned out that it was this guy who did it, but at the time, she ended up getting kind of, like, intimidated by the police, and then taking her story back and saying she'd lied, and then they ended up charging her with false reporting and all this stuff, and then, like, I mean, really the only good thing that came of it was that because it all came out later that actually she was telling the truth, they had to do this whole investigation into the way that the department in that particular community in Washington did things. So it was like, alright, that's probably better now. But yes, it's pretty depressing. In that sense, but you also definitely go into it like, yeah, at least we know the guy gets caught. There's stuff about how, like, he went about doing things and his psychology and stuff, too. So, I mean, I thought it was pretty good. Yeah. I was hoping there would be more general, applicable stuff, but, like, there was some towards the end, but it was mostly focused on the specific case. But, you know, I mean, it was good. That's nice. Sorry, I'm reading the guy's little biographies back here, you know, because the one guy, well, they said both reporters for ProPublica, but the one guy used to work at the Marshall Project and the Chicago Tribune. His work helped prompt the Illinois governor to suspend executions and empty death row. So that's really cool. Oh, I see. Okay, so the Pulitzer Prize was for an article about this particular story, and I actually read that article, completely unrelated, like probably last year sometime. Probably found it on the Marshall Project because I check their website sometimes. Anyway, that's the kind of stuff I do when I'm bored at work. Anyway, so yeah, it was what it said on the package. And it was, you know, it was interesting. Yeah. I don't know, there's nothing else to say, really. It was worth it, I think. I like the title. Anyway. Okay, so The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories by Ken Liu. I just finished this last night. Yes, it's a bunch of science fiction and fantasy and other short stories by Ken Liu, and one of them is maybe long enough to be a novella. It's 100 pages. And it's super excellent. This is the first thing I've read by him. He translated 2 of the books of the Three Body Problem, like, trilogy, and I read all those a few years ago, and they blew my mind. Obviously he didn't write them, but I still wanted to read something by him, so when I saw this at the library, I was like, I'll try it out. And yeah, so it's a collection of short stories which he put together, basically ones that have won awards and some of his favorites that he thinks deserve more attention, I guess. And they were all really good. I really enjoyed the longest one, which is called All the Flavors. That one was interesting. I guess what I liked most about it was that a lot of them have some reference to aspect of Chinese history, which I know basically nothing about, or Chinese mythology, which I also know basically nothing about. So like the one I mentioned, All the Flavors, the longest one, is about this little girl living in Idaho City in 1870-something, mumble, and how she makes friends with the Chinese men who live next door. And it was just interesting because it's a nice little story, but then at the very end he has some footnote at the end of a few of them, and in that one he noted that there were a lot of Chinese people who moved to Idaho during that time period, and like the population of Idaho was like 28% Asian or something, which is wild. But then, like, the reason that that's not the case anymore is basically because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, and none of them, they weren't allowed to bring their wives to America, and other Chinese people didn't come to America after that for quite a while. So basically all of these, oh, and also they weren't allowed to marry white people, so basically once they died, they didn't have any children. So that's sad, but it's interesting. It's just a little interesting bit of history. But yeah, just all of these stories they're really well written. I like the book Making Habits of Select Species, where he just invents a bunch of crazy aliens and how they make books. And it's pretty similar to elements of, I think, of an advanced reader's picture book of comparative cognition, which has to do with how these aliens read. And there's a lot of stuff about, it's a huge variety of things, from parts of history to imaginings of the future, and I thought it was really good, and I'm really glad I read it. And like the ones that could count as science fiction, just there's a huge variety of, like, oh, in this story there's like some wild technology that's changing the world. In this story, you know, we're traveling to another planet. There's a number of ones with that. I love the one where the guy, like the few survivors of Earth are on the spaceship traveling out into space, and they have a solar sail, and he sacrifices himself to, spoilers I guess, to fix it. And the stuff in that story as well about how there's so few survivors that, like, each person is trying to keep their own culture alive, and this guy is Japanese, and he's like the only remnant of Japanese, like, culture at all left, because he's the only survivor, and it's like the most depressing thing, but it's also really interesting. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I was hungering for some science fiction, and short stories especially are just one of my favorite things. So yeah. that's what I have to say about that, I guess. Hey fam, The Girl Who Played with Fire by Stieg Larsson. I super hate this cover. This cover, like, this one is so much better. I don't know why they couldn't put that on the outside of their little box. This is a call-out post for my library. I forgot for a minute I just got this from my library and I didn't have to get it from one of the other ones. Okay, The Girl Who Played with Fire. This is the second book in the Millennium series. I guess there's like a fourth book was just published earlier this year. I have very little interest in actually reading it because, obviously it's by a different author. But I did want to read the 3 by Stieg Larsson. Anywho, I read The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo last year. And I'd seen the movie previously though, but this one I went into blind because I only watched like the British, American, whatever movie, not the Swedish ones. So I, had no idea what was going to happen in this book. I liked it. It was good, obviously. It was like kind of slow getting started, I felt, because there was just this whole extended part that was just all about how Lisbeth Salander was spending her like year away from Sweden. She just like fucks off, and because she has like several billion kroner, which she stole from the dude in the last book, Wennerström, and she's, so she's traveling. There's this whole sequence where she's in Grenada and she's just staying at some hotel there, and like then there's a hurricane, but then there's this really weird bit where she's out in it because she sees somebody like getting killed on the beach, and then she realizes that it is not a hurricane, it's a tornado, and I was like, what the fuck is happening? Like, I don't know why Larsson was like, anyway, what if it was a giant tornado instead? And then there was this line about how tornadoes can't form on water, and it's like, yeah, they can. Anyway, whatever. Maybe they don't have tornadoes in Sweden. I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. I have no idea, and I'm not looking it up. So, so it took a while before I could figure out what the plot was going to be about, because this particular book does not have anything useful written on the back. It's just like, stuff happens, Fermat's theorem, which she like has decided she wants to spend her time like studying that, but that was just in the beginning. Like when the plot actually got started, that got dropped. The thing I thought was kind of silly was like one of the main villains is this really big hulking dude who doesn't feel pain, which I believe is probably an actual defect some people have, but like the way this guy just acted and was described so much, he seems like he's come out of a James Bond movie. Like, he sounds exactly like the kind of person who would be like the thuggish, like a thuggish enforcer for whatever the actual villain was, which is essentially his role in the book. So the plot, basically, once it gets to the plot, is that a couple of a journalist and a criminologist who are working with Millennium to publish a book and stuff about like their study into sex trafficking and a variety of like judges, police officers, whatnot in Sweden who have actually been like benefiting from this. They get murdered. And then Lisbeth gets sort of framed for the murder. Like, nobody actually set out to frame her, but she ends up being the main suspect for quite a long time, and we follow around some police officers, and so I finished this on my way home from work today, and I'm literally like, the ending was really abrupt. Like, it was so abrupt. Like, it really doesn't wrap up, for the satisfaction of the audience, it's like, yeah, we know who did what, but like, in the book, not everybody knows everything, and I guess you can just sort of assume it'll all work out, but I don't know. So, I don't know. I felt like maybe we could have done with an epilogue, but maybe the third book connects more closely with this one. I don't know. I'm definitely going to read the third book at some point, just not right away. I did like it, though. Larson has a very particular style of writing, I feel. Like, well, he does this annoying thing where he lists so many things. It's like there's this whole part where she goes to IKEA and buys all this furniture, and he decides he has to tell us, like, every single piece of furniture she bought. And I'm just like, Larson, it's not necessary. I just don't care. I don't care, man. I don't care what furniture she bought at IKEA. I don't care what food she bought at the convenience store. I don't care. Stop. But whatever. That's really my only complaint. I think this is the first book I've read this year that was translated into English. Like, I don't know, I was thinking about this, like, gosh, I really don't read translated books very often. I mean, in America, or just like in the English language reading sphere, really translation kind of doesn't happen a ton. Apparently, I don't know, I was reading some articles about this, like, there are plenty of countries in Europe where, you know, you can see all the, like, best-selling books are a lot more, like, likely to be translated from other languages, but not in America. Anyway, whatever. This is obviously an exception to that particular rule, but I was just thinking about it, like, yeah, this was translated from Swedish, and, the back describes Elizabeth as a Baltic MacGyver. What? I don't know. So, one thing that I really liked about the choices he made in this book was, like, that he delved into a lot into why Elizabeth was under guardianship. Because in the first book, it's like, okay, she has a guardian, she's like in her mid-20s, but she's been deemed incompetent to take care of herself. And it's like, you're reading it and you're like, but clearly she can take care of herself. So, like, what is going on here? So there's some explanation for that in here. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to the third book with the hope that it will tie up some of the loose ends of this one. And, also she has this twin sister who was mentioned a number of times but does not show up in this book. And I'm like, she's got to show up in the third one, right? Like, right? Anyway, I have no idea what the third one's about. I just know the title. But yeah, so probably I'll end up getting to it, like, next year. But, I don't really feel like I need to tell you this is a good book and worth reading. Everybody knows that, right? Just, I read it, and I enjoyed it. Old Mars. This is a collection of science fiction short stories, all new, written for this book, and put together, edited by George R. R. Martin and Gardner Dozois. I assume it's the pronunciation. They're mostly by people I've never heard of, so that's fun. But, yeah, so I picked this up because I wanted more science fiction short stories, and the concept is really cool. So, there's this whole introduction in here by George R. R. Martin to the idea behind this collection, which is that after the, I guess it was the Mariner probes were sent to Mars, and we actually got some pictures of it, and actually knew what Mars was like, science fiction set on Mars changed. Which makes sense, of course, but he was like, I miss the old stuff, you know, when Mars might have had oceans, and it might have had ancient cities, and it might have had people living on it. And so, all of these stories are written with those kind of assumptions of Mars still existing. So Mars in all of these stories has some sort of life, and they're really fun. Like, there are a huge variety of stuff in here. Let me think. What is my favorite? I think my favorite was The Wreck of the Mars Adventure, which was by David D. Levine. And it was delightful because the basic concept was that this prisoner who was like a pirate was going to be executed, but then King William I, maybe, comes to him in his cell and is like, I will free you and not execute you if you will do this thing, if you will go on this journey. And he's like, okay. And the journey is to sail to Mars. And it's probably the story in here that is like the least scientifically like realistic, because they're just like, yeah, we put some balloons on the boat and it gets up into the atmosphere, and then eventually it comes to a point where there's no more gravity, but there's still air, and then they just float to Mars, and then they get there and some other stuff happens, and it is completely delightful. I love it. It's a lot of fun, because you're like, you know what, yeah, why should science fiction have to actually take into account all the science that we know when it's being written? Although most of these other stories are a bit more realistic. Like, there'll still be aliens living on Mars, or there'll still have been aliens at some point living on Mars, but like they've left their ancient cities. And, you know, but other than that, it's like, it's still Mars. Like, it's, you know, it's cold and it's got deserts. No, I mean, all the stories were cool. Like, I liked how in Mariner, the Martians naturally live and breathe underwater, but the planet is drying up slowly, and they sail on sand. So it's like a reverse of our planet, and that's really interesting. What else was fun? I liked, let's see, was it Swords of Zartukan? Yeah, that one was fun. What's the one? Fuck. Written in Dust was nice. That one was by Melinda M. Snodgrass, who was one of the couple of names I recognized on here. I liked James S.A. Corey's A Man Without Honor. It had space opera elements to it that I think bode well for my eventual reading of the Expanse kind of series of books, which, spoilers, but that's the next book I'm reading. I'm reading Leviathan's Wake. But yeah, anyway. It was good. And apparently there's another collection called Old Venus. I'm way less familiar with what Venus is written like in older science fiction. I think I've only read like one story set there. Maybe it was by Bradbury, I don't really remember, but it was like, oh, Venus has lush jungles, and I guess that's the basic concept. So that should be interesting, because that's going to be even more like unexpected and not quite knowing the tropes for me. Anyway, but this is like Rocket. Yeah, this is good. This is good. I liked it a lot. I mean, I like science fiction short stories. There's 15 of them. 15! Yeah, and it's nice, too, to read sci-fi that's, like, not super old. Because super old sci-fi can get kind of exhausting. This book has a few queer characters. And it has women. So, you know, that's nice. That's a contrast to old sci-fi a lot of the time. So it kind of combines good things from modern science fiction with some really fun ideas and settings from older science fiction. So it's like, it's a really good concept. And I approve. What's up, everybody? I've decided that I want to play a game where I will force myself to actually read the books that I own and have not read. I have written names of 12 of them on these little slips of paper, and I guess the plan basically is to pick one at random every month, and then I will read it for the next video, basically. It's like a motivation for myself to make myself, like, actually, because I own all of these books. I haven't read them, so this is where I'm beginning. I'm beginning right now because, well, I could wait a month and start next year, but what's the point? Let's begin it right now. Oh, Jesus. Trying to blow the dust out of this. Okay, I have a mug that I never use, clearly, because it's covered in dust. And I'm going to use it to put these in. But I'm going to tell you what they all are so that y'all know I'm not cheating and adding or subtracting books. However, if I do feel compelled to read one of these before I've actually picked it, then I'll replace it with something. Okay, so I've got Wizard of Earthsea, which is a book by Ursula Le Guin, and of all of these books, it's the one I've owned the longest without reading. I've literally had it for like 11 years. It's quite short. Broca's Brain, which is by Carl Sagan, and I think it's science fiction. Come here. The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. White Fang by Jack Lemmon, I think. A Field Guide to Bacteria, which is a book I picked up like a couple of years ago at Half Price Books, and I haven't read it, but I'm intrigued by the concept. I am a microbiologist, after all. All About Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse. I actually have 2 books by P.G. Wodehouse that I haven't read, but I was like, you know what, we're only including one. The Dragons of Eden, which is another sci-fi book by Carl Sagan. Seven Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence, which, yeah, of all these books is by far the longest, so I am a little bit frightened about the prospect of picking this one out, but I've also read the first third, but it was like 4 years ago, so I'm just going to reread that and read the whole fucking thing and finish it this time. God damn it. It's a memoir of sorts. The Climb. It's a non-fiction book about climbing Mount Everest, I'm pretty sure. The Fantastic Voyage. It's a book by Asimov, and I believe it is a novelization of the movie that I didn't even know existed, but I watched an interview of his on YouTube at one point where he said that. The Great SF Stories, number 15, which is put together by Asimov, and it's a set of science fiction short stories that are all, I believe, from the year 1953. It was put together a couple decades after that, but I guess it's a series. I don't know. I found it at Half Price Books. And finally, Bullfinch's Mythology. So, not quite sure how to make this work. I'm shaking it. I'm like, I don't think you could see it when I put it down there. Alright. Please don't pick $7 of wisdom. Alright, I got one. The Dragons of Eden. Okay. Intriguing. Put that back. I'm gonna get it from my shelf. Ooh. Maybe it's not science fiction. Okay, so this is it, The Dragons of Eden. Speculations on the Evolution of Human Intelligence. It's got some, like, furry monkey people, and also a dinosaur on the cover, so I have some questions about this. Oh! And it's got this awesome drawing of, like, the little lizards crawling out of the drawing and then crawling back in, which is, like, one of my favorite works of art, because I don't care about art that much, but stuff like this works for me. Anyway, the equally fascinating inner world of the mind. going to explain how human beings evolved, genes and brains together, who our ancestors and their competitors were. This should be interesting. It's, oh god. Okay, no, just kidding. I scared myself because I saw this and was like, is that how the typing is? No, it's not. It's bigger than that. Good. Hahaha. Okay, so okay, this is nonfiction, I guess, and I don't know if I would have called it The Dragons of Eden, personally, because what the fuck, but it made me think I was going to get some dragons. But anyway, it will be interesting to read, I hope, and I hope it's not too out of date. It is from 1977, so I think I maybe know enough about this topic to be able to go, that's not right, if he writes about something that's not right. There's like a fucking phoenix. What is happening in this illustration? Okay.